Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our job here is to give you that shortcut to being really well informed. And today, we are diving into something that's, well, it's jumped right out of the environment section and landed squarely in public health. We are talking about microplastics.
Yeah.
For years, the whole conversation was, pollution, oceans, landfills.
Mm-hmm. The external problem.
Exactly. But our sources today, especially this key JAMA Insights article from just last month, October 2025.
Microplastics in human health.
That's the one. It really forces us to shift focus. So the mission today is to unpack the evidence showing this is an evolving crisis happening, well, inside our bodies right now.
And the scale. I mean, if you want to grasp the scale of this internal issue, you just have to look at the production numbers.
Okay.
Plastic production hit, what was it, 435 million tons back in 2020?
Wow, 435 million?
But what's really frightening is the forecast. Industry expects that volume to jump another 70% by 2040.
70% increase?
Yeah. We're basically talking about this tide of material that just shows no sign of slowing down.
That's just exponential growth of the source material itself.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's not just the plastic polymer. The sources talk about the chemicals involved, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole chemical soup. There are over 13,000 chemicals linked to plastics manufacturing.
Yeah.
Used for everything, making it stable, giving it color.
Okay.
But the critical thing, the thing the sources highlight, is these 10 groups of chemicals identified as being of major concern. Really high toxicity.
And these are things that can leach out.
Easily. We're talking about known heavy hitters, things like phthalates, bisphenols, and PFAS.
PFAS, those are the forever chemicals we hear so much about.
Exactly. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances.
Yeah.
Highly persistent, toxic, and our bodies just don't really have a good way to get rid of them.
Okay, so let's track this stuff. How does it get in? We define microplastics as fragments smaller than 5 millimeters, right?
Correct.
And the source material says it's not just eating or drinking them, we're breathing them in too.
That's a major pathway. And the way we inhale them is particularly concerning, especially the really fine particles.
How small are we talking?
The ones measuring 2.5 micrometers or smaller. Those seem to be able to bypass a lot of our natural defenses.
2.5 micrometers. Can you give us a sense of scale?
Sure. It's about 30 times thinner than a single human hair. Really tiny.
Okay, that's small.
And that small size lets them get deep, right into the alveoli, those little air sacs in the lungs where oxygen gets into the blood.
Then from the lungs.
They can cross into the bloodstream, and once they're in the blood, they basically get carried around the body and can accumulate in all sorts of tissues.
That just changes the whole picture, doesn't it? You think you're breathing clean air, but you could be breathing in this industrial dust small enough to get into your circulation.
It's sobering thought.
And then you get the ingestion side, which, looking at the data, forces you to reconsider things you consume every single day. Like drinks.
Yeah. The beverage study from 2020 was quite an eye-opener.
Tell us about that. They tested common cold drinks.
They did. Soft drinks,
Right.
beer, cold tea, energy drinks, 57 different types.
Totally.
They found detectable microplastics in 48 of them, almost all.
48 out of 57? That statistic genuinely surprised me. I mean, in sealed drinks.
It really highlights how widespread the exposure is. And the highest amount they found, an average of 28 particles per liter. That was actually in a beer sample.
In beer? Why beer?
Well, it suggests that processing and bottling, maybe the equipment, the lines, the caps, can introduce contamination, even in something you'd think is pretty tightly controlled.
Okay, so drinks. What else? Personal hair products.
That's another source. A 2024 review looked at cosmetics and personal care items, found microplastics in over 16% of the products they tested.
16%?
And if you zoom in on face scrubs, specifically, it was even higher. Over a quarter, 26.5% of the scrubs they tested contained them, intentionally added, often.
Right, as exfoliants. So we're breathing them, drinking them, even rubbing them on our skin.
It adds up to this significant internal load, which brings us to the really crucial part, how they cause harm. It's what we call the dual threat.
Dual threat, meaning they aren't just inert pieces of plastic passing through.
Exactly. They're not harmless filler. There's a physical mechanism at play here that's quite fascinating.
Okay, what is it?
Microplastics act as powerful sorbents.
Sorbents, like they soak things up.
Precisely. Think of them as tiny, very efficient toxic sponges. Their surface is rough, full of little crevices and pores.
Okay.
And this structure lets them attract and physically grab onto other harmful substances from the environment.
So a toxic sponge. I like that analogy. It makes the double hit clear. You've got the plastic maybe leaching its own chemicals,
Right.
and then it's also acting like a magnet for other toxins out there.
That's exactly it. They actively absorb contaminants, heavy metals, microbes, nasty stuff like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons,
Yeah.
from combustion.
Right.
They bind these things through different chemical forces, hydrophobic interactions, electrostatic charges, literally filling the pores. So they end up carrying this cocktail of poisons they picked up from water or dust.
So the particle basically concentrates the pollution it encounters.
It does.
Does it then deliver this concentrated dose more effectively inside our bodies, more than if we just ingested the toxin alone?
That's the major concern. And the lab evidence, the in vitro stuff, really points in that direction.
What kind of evidence?
Studies using human cell lines, organoids, these sort of mini organs grown in the lab, and also animal models. They consistently show exposure increases oxidative stress.
Oxidative stress.
Yeah.
That's damage at the cellular level, right?
Yes, an imbalance that leads to the production of reactive oxygen species. These are unstable molecules that damage cells.
Okay.
We see increased cell membrane damage, problems with organelles inside the cells, and critically, DNA damage.
DNA damage, that's serious.
It is. And there are specific examples, like researchers exposed liver organoids, those mini livers, to polystyrene microplastics.
And what happened?
It induced hepatotoxicity, liver damage.
How could they tell?
They saw a significant rise in a key inflammatory marker, something called interleukin-6, or IL-6.
Ah, an inflammation signal.
A very clear inflammatory response, yeah.
Yeah.
It strongly suggests these particles aren't just sitting there. They're actively provoking the body's defense systems and causing harm.
That evidence on cellular damage, it starts to explain the really alarming part of this deep dive, the sheer accumulation we're now finding in human tissues all over the globe.
Yeah, this isn't theoretical anymore. It's measurable contamination.
And it's incredibly widespread, isn't it, the list of places they've been found?
It's extensive. Lungs, brain, blood, liver, kidneys, heart, spleen, colon, even tests and ovarian follicular fluid.
Wow, practically everywhere.
And maybe most disturbingly, we're seeing signs of it crossing generations. Microplastics have been detected in human breast milk, and even in infants' meconium, their very first stools.
So exposure starting literally before birth or immediately after.
Appears so.
And the trend, the data over time suggests this isn't just a level we've reached and plateaued at. The concentrations seem to be going up.
That's right. The crisis seems to be accelerating. The longitudinal data is quite powerful here.
Tell us about that, the placenta study.
Yes, the one from Hawaii. They looked at placental samples collected over 15 years, from 2006 up to 2021.
And what did they find?
Well, first, the detection frequency just soared. It went from 60% of placentas having detectable microplastics back in 2006
60%.
to 100% by 2021.
100%. Every single placenta they tested in the later years had microplastics.
Every single one. And it wasn't just if they were present, it was how much.
The concentration increased too.
Significantly.
Yeah.
The average particle count per 50 grams of tissue went from about 4.1 particles in 2006 to 15.5 particles in 2021. That's a statistically significant increase, nearly 4 times higher.
So the crisis starts before birth, and it's getting worse over time. What about after birth? Accumulation in organs like the brain.
We're seeing similar worrying trends there, too, suggesting accumulation continues, maybe even accelerates in really sensitive organs.
You mean the brain concentration data?
Exactly. Postmortem brain tissue analysis shows a clear difference over time. Samples from 2024 had median concentrations around 4,917 micrograms per gram.
Okay, nearly 5,000.
Compare that to samples from 2016, where the median was about 3,345 micrograms per gram.
So a significant jump there as well, statistically higher in just 8 years.
Yes. The accumulation isn't just happening, it appears to be accelerating even in our most critical protected organs.
Which inevitably leads us to the question of health effects. What does this accumulation mean for our health?
And this is where the data starts painting a very concerning picture. Now, as researchers, we always have to be careful here.
Right, the distinction between association and causation.
Precisely. These are observational studies. They show a strong association between the presence of microplastics and certain diseases, but they don't definitively prove that the plastics cause the disease. Not yet, anyway.
Okay, that's a crucial caveat, like how smoking was first linked to lung cancer through association before the mechanisms were fully proving. You see them together.
That's a good analogy. People with the exposure are more likely to have the outcome. And the association with cardiovascular risk is one of the starkest findings so far.
Cardiovascular, heart attacks, strokes. Give us the numbers on that.
Okay, so there was a study looking at patients who had carotid artery disease, but no symptoms yet.
Right. Plaque buildup in the neck arteries.
Exactly. They examined the plaque surgically removed from these patients. They found microplastics, specifically polyethylene in this case, embedded in the plaque in 58.4% of the sample.
Wow. So the plastic is literally mixed in with the cholesterol and stuff blocking the artery.
It seems to be part of the physical structure of that blockage.
Okay. And the link to outcomes.
This is the key part. They followed these patients for about 34 months. Those patients who had detectable microplastics in their carotid plaque,
Yes.
they had a 4.5 times higher risk of suffering a major event, a heart attack, a stroke, or dying from any cause, compared to the patients whose plaque did not contain detectable microplastics.
4.5 times the risk,
Yeah.
just associated with having plastic particles in that plaque.
4.5 times.
Yeah.
It's a huge difference in risk.
That's a massive increase, hard to ignore even with the association causation caveat.
It really is.
What about the brain? Given those rising concentrations you mentioned, is there similar data linking microplastics to neurological issues like dementia?
There is preliminary data, and it's equally concerning. One postmortem study directly compared brain tissue from patients who had dementia with tissue from individuals who didn't.
Okay.
They found significantly higher levels of microplastics in the brains of the dementia patients. The average was around 26,000 micrograms per gram,
26,000 compared to what in the non-dementia group?
compared to about 4,100 micrograms per gram in the control group without dementia.
So more than 6 times higher concentration in the dementia brains.
A very significant difference. Again, it's association. But it raises really powerful questions about what role this internal contamination might be playing in complex, devastating diseases like dementia.
Okay, so summing up so far, we have this chemical threat from the plastics themselves, plus they act as toxic sponges. We're exposed constantly through breathing and ingestion. Accumulation inside us is widespread and increasing even in placentas and brains. And now we see these strong associations with really severe outcomes, cardiovascular events, possibly dementia.
That captures it well. The urgency feels pretty clear for the data.
Which brings us to the response. What are governments, international bodies actually doing about this, and is it enough?
Well, we do have some existing international agreements, but they mostly focus on the end of the pipe, so to speak, the waste problem.
Right, you mean things like the Basel Convention amendments from 2019, controlling shipments of plastic waste?
Exactly. Regulating the global trash trade. And MARPOL Annex V, which stops ships dumping plastic overboard.
Both important for managing the mess we've already made.
Vital, yes.
Yeah.
But fundamentally insufficient, because they don't really address the source of the problem. They don't deal with production, the sheer volume being made, or the hazardous chemicals used in the first place.
And that seems to be the core challenge, right? A real solution has to look at the whole life cycle, from the design, the chemicals used, right through to how it's disposed of, or ideally, reused or replaced.
That's precisely the goal of the big international effort underway now, the United Nations Global Plastics Treaty.
The Plastics Treaty, that's been in negotiation for a while now.
Since March 2022. And the ambition is high. They're aiming for an international, legally binding agreement.
Legally binding is key.
Absolutely. And the scope is meant to cover the full life cycle of plastics, which means potentially mandatory rules for safer design, restrictions on those really dangerous chemical groups we talked about.
Like the PFAS and phthalates.
Yes. And potentially even setting global targets or limits on overall plastic production.
That sounds like exactly what's needed, but you can imagine the pushback, given how massive the global petrochemical industry is. What are the biggest roadblocks?
The biggest one, and the source material really emphasizes this, comes down to economics, viability, and competitiveness.
Meaning?
The current plastics industry is built on cheap, high-volume production. It's deeply tied to the oil and gas sector.
Right, plastic is mostly made from fossil fuels.
Exactly. So those producers, they're lobbying very hard against anything that restricts production volume or forces them to use alternative materials that might be safer, but are currently more expensive.
So if we want to achieve the goal, swapping out harmful plastics for materials that are safe for people and the environment,
that shift has to be economically workable. If the safe alternatives stay way more expensive than the cheap, harmful polymers we use now,
then industry adoption will be slow, regulations are not, especially globally.
that's the crux of it. Any effective policy, especially a global treaty, needs to figure out how to make biologically safe materials not just available, but actually economically competitive. That's the real sticking point.
Okay, that really frames the challenge ahead. So let's wrap up this deep dive. What we've uncovered today is pretty stark. This microplastic issue isn't some distant environmental problem anymore. It's a current, measurable, and worsening crisis of accumulation inside our own bodies.
Yeah, these particles are acting as toxic carriers, concentrating pollutants, and their presence is being linked, strongly associated at least, with potentially life-threatening conditions, heart attacks, strokes, and maybe even dementia.
The urgency seems undeniable. That data showing accelerating levels in placentas and brains, it suggests this problem is building much faster than our current responses.
It really underscores why global policy needs to get much more aggressive and move way beyond just managing waste after the fact.
So this brings us to the final thought for you, our listener. We know the big policy aim is replacing harmful plastics with safer ones. But thinking about that economic hurdle we just discussed, given how reliant the global economy is on cheap plastic, what specific mechanism, something beyond just a simple ban or a tax, do you think the UN Global Plastics Treaty could actually use to flip the script? To make those environmentally and biologically safe materials the cheaper the default option worldwide.
How do you change the fundamental economic incentives?
Exactly. Something to think about.
We really encourage you to keep considering this internal accumulation data and its implications as these crucial negotiations over the future of plastics unfold.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll be back soon with more insights from the cutting edge.